The safest man in America owns almost nothing, and that is exactly why nobody can touch him. Not because he is poor, not because he has given up, because somewhere along the way, while everyone around him was building a life out of paper promises, he built a life out of nothing the system could grab. No mortgage, no car note, no credit line sitting open like an unlocked door. He is 58 years old, and on paper, to a bank, to a court, to a collector, with a judgment in his hand, he does not exist. He is a ghost wearing work boots, and the people who spent 30 years chasing everything he refused to touch are the ones lying awake tonight wondering how a man with so little ended up so far out of reach. Let me tell you about a man named Walsh. Walsh spent 31 years as a maintenance supervisor for a mid-sized manufacturing plant outside of Dayton, Ohio. He raised 2 kids. He paid off his house in cash after 11 years of overtime shifts, and a refusal to ever refinance, not once, no matter how good the rate looked on paper. He carried a single debit card, no credit cards, not even for the points, no car payment, because he drove the same paid-off pickup truck for 14 years and fixed it himself in his own garage. Walsh did every single thing the old rules told him to do. He saved. He waited. He said no to the boat, the vacation home, the second income stream everyone at church was talking about. He built a life with a floor under it. And then, 3 years ago, his neighbors sued him. It was a property line dispute, the kind of petty, ugly fight that happens between 2 men who have lived next to each other for 2 decades. The neighbor lost the lawsuit outright, but filed again on a technicality, dragging Walsh into 18 months of legal exhaustion just to make him bleed money defending himself. And here is the part that should make you sit up. When the neighbor's lawyer ran the standard search to see what could be seized if a judgment ever landed, checking for bank accounts, checking for liens, checking for anything with Walsh's name attached that could be frozen or garnished, they found almost nothing. A paid-off house held under a specific legal structure. No open credit, no investment accounts sitting in his own name, no liquid target. The lawyer told the neighbor, in essence, that even if he won, there would be almost nothing to collect. Walsh was not hiding. He was simply unreachable because he had spent 3 decades quietly refusing to be anything else. Think about what that means. The man who did everything right was not protected because he was virtuous. He was protected because he was invisible to the machinery that people use against each other. And somewhere right now, in whatever house or apartment you are sitting in, you have a decision in front of you that is either building you toward that same invisibility or building you toward being a very easy target. That is the paradox this entire story is about. The system does not punish you for having nothing. It punishes you for having just enough for someone else to take. Now, I want to take you back to a specific place, a specific year, and a specific decision, because the trap you're living inside of today was not an accident. It was built. Go back with me to the spring of 2008. Not the crash itself, not yet, but the months leading into it, when a loan officer named Raymond, working out of a regional bank branch in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, was closing home equity lines of credit at a pace his own branch manager called unsustainable in an internal memo that later surfaced during litigation. $218,000 was the average line Raymond was approving that spring, against homes that had been appraised conveniently at prices that made no sense against local wages. The pitch was simple and it was everywhere. Your house has gone up in value. That value is sitting there doing nothing. Why let it sit idle when you could unlock it, renovate the kitchen, pay off the higher interest cards, send a kid to college, live the life you have earned? It sounded like access. It sounded like freedom. It was leverage, and leverage is a word for a rope that looks like a gift until someone else is holding the other end. By the fall of that same year, home values in that part of Florida had fallen by roughly 35% in under 12 months. The equity Raymond had helped homeowners unlock did not just stop growing. It reversed, and it took the original value of the house down with it. Families who had borrowed against a number that existed only on an appraiser's optimistic afternoon were now underwater, owing more than the house was worth, while still carrying the original mortgage on top of the new line of credit. The bank that had encouraged the borrowing was made whole. It always is. The debt does not evaporate when the value does. Only the value evaporates. The debt is patient. The debt waits. Here is what almost nobody explains to you about that year, and it is the part that should actually make you angry. The families who lost the least in 2008 were not the ones with the most impressive net worth on paper. They were the ones who had refused to unlock anything, the ones who kept their equity boring, untouched, illiquid, sitting there doing nothing anyone could see. Nobody congratulated them at the time. They looked, frankly, unambitious. Their neighbors had granite countertops and boats in the driveway. And then 2008 arrived, and the unambitious men were the only ones still standing on solid ground, because they had never handed the rope to anyone. The mechanism is identical today, only the names have changed. You are not being offered a home equity line of credit with the same words anymore, because that phrase carries a scar now. But you are being offered the same rope in 100 different disguises. A buy now, pay later plan at checkout. A 0% introductory rate that resets the moment you are 1 day late. A retirement account you can borrow against for an emergency, as if borrowing from your own future self is not still borrowing. Every single one of these products exists for the same reason Raymond's home equity line existed. Somebody profits when you owe something. Somebody's entire quarterly performance review depends on how much of your future income they can get you to sign away today. And the more of these ropes you are holding, the easier it becomes for anyone. A hospital billing department, a former business partner, an ex-spouse's attorney, a random stranger's insurance company after a fender bender, to find something of yours worth grabbing. You have been taught your whole life that the goal is to look successful. More accounts, more available credit, a higher limit as some kind of trophy for good behavior. Nobody ever sat you down and told you that every one of those things is also a handle the system, or a hostile creditor, or a predatory lawsuit can grab onto and use to pull you off your feet. The goal was never supposed to be how much you could access. The goal was supposed to be how little of you could be reached. Now let me show you how the machine actually works underneath, because once you see the mechanics, you cannot unsee them. Picture your financial life as a house with 100 doors and windows. Every credit card is a door. Every loan is a window. Every account that has your name and your signature attached is an entry point. Most people spend their entire adult life proudly adding doors. A new card here, a car loan there, a home equity line, a retirement loan, a co-signed lease for a kid, each one framed as an opportunity, an upgrade, a step forward. Nobody hands you a warning label. Nobody tells you that every door you add is also a door someone else, someday, under the right legal circumstances, can walk through and take something out of your house. This is not a conspiracy. Nobody sat in a room and designed it to hurt you specifically. It is simply engineering, and engineering does not care about your intentions. A system built to extract interest, fees, and leverage from as many open accounts as possible will always favor a version of you that carries maximum exposure. That is not personal. It is just the shape of the machine. And the machine rewards the people who build it, and quietly punishes the people who live inside it without ever asking who designed the blueprints. Here is the part that should make you uncomfortable. You have probably spent your whole life thinking of debt and disaster as two separate categories. Something that happens to reckless people who overspend, people who deserve what they get. But let me tell you about a man named Halverson, because his story proves this has nothing to do with recklessness at all. Halverson was not reckless. He was the opposite. A regional sales director for an industrial parts distributor, 26 years with the same company, six-figure income at his peak, a 4-bedroom house, 2 kids through college with no loans because he had planned for it, or so he believed. In 2007, on the advice of a financial planner he trusted, a man with a nice office and a framed license on the wall, Halverson refinanced his paid-off house to invest the released equity into a diversified portfolio that promised steady 8% annual returns. He was told this was prudent. He was told this was what sophisticated people did with idle capital. By late 2008, that portfolio had lost 42% of its value, and Halverson was now making mortgage payments on a house he used to own outright, against an investment that was worth less than half of what he had borrowed to fund it. He did not gamble. He trusted. He followed the exact advice a credentialed professional gave him in a nice office with a framed license on the wall, and it cost him 2 decades of quiet accumulation in 14 months. This is not bad luck. This is the design. Walsh and Halverson did not fail because one was careless and the other was careful. They ended up in opposite positions because one of them kept his equity boring and untouched, and the other one was talked into unlocking it and handing it to a system built to profit from exactly that decision. Same era, same country, same starting income bracket. Opposite outcomes, because one man's life had doors and windows everywhere, and the other man's life had almost none. And here is the part that changes everything you thought you understood about respect, about authority, about why certain men command a room without raising their voice. It is not because of manners. It is because of math. Think about the men you have actually respected in your life, the ones whose presence made a room go quiet without them saying a word. They were not the loudest. They were not the ones flashing something new every year. They were calm, because calm is what a man looks like when he does not need anything from the people around him. A man who owes nothing to anyone does not flinch when a favor is called in, because no favor is owed. He does not perform for approval, because his position does not depend on anyone else's opinion of him. That composure you have always read as personality was never personality at all. It was the visible surface of a man who had made himself unreachable, and unreachable men do not need to raise their voice, because nothing in the room has any leverage over them. This is the part of the story most people never get told, because the version of masculine authority sold to you for the last 60 years runs in the opposite direction entirely. You were taught that command comes from acquisition. The bigger truck, the better watch, the corner office with your name on the door. But acquisition is leverage in a costume. Every acquired thing is either paid for in cash, in which case it is simply a fact about your life, or it is financed, in which case it is a leash with your name stitched into the collar. A man covered in financed status symbols does not command a room. He is simply the best-dressed hostage in it. And on some level, everyone in that room can feel it, even if they could not tell you why. The system did not remove this understanding from your father's generation by accident. Starting in the early 1960s and accelerating through the following 2 decades, the advertising industry, the consumer credit industry, and eventually the entire retail economy built themselves around one single reframing. Thrift, the old quiet discipline of owning less and owing nothing, was rebranded deliberately as embarrassment. Living within your means stopped being a virtue and became evidence that you had not made it. A paid-off car became something to apologize for instead of something to be proud of. This was not cultural drift. It was a coordinated multi-decade campaign funded by the exact industries that profit every time you sign your name on a line, and it worked because 2 generations later, you are sitting here having to be reminded that owing nothing to anyone was ever supposed to be the goal in the first place. So here is where this leaves you, and I want you to actually sit with this instead of rushing past it. You are not being asked to live small. You are not being asked to deprive yourself out of some monkish idea of virtue. You are being asked to notice, honestly, how many doors and windows you have left open in your own life right now, today, and to ask yourself who benefits from every single one of them staying open. The credit line you have not used in 3 years, but keep because it feels like a safety net. The car payment on a vehicle that has depreciated faster than you have paid it down. The retirement loan you took because it seemed harmless at the time. Every one of them is a handle. Every one of them is a door with your name already carved into the frame, waiting for someone, someday, to knock. Walsh is 61 years old now. The lawsuit from his neighbor is long since dismissed, the legal fees paid and forgotten, and Walsh still drives the same truck, still lives in the same paid-off house, still carries the same single debit card. Nothing about his life looks impressive from the outside. No one at his old plant would point to him as a man who won anything. But he is the only man in his entire circle of friends who, when asked what keeps him up at night, genuinely cannot think of an answer. Not because his life has been easy, because his life has been built so that almost nothing left in it can be taken from him by force. That is not smallness. That is architecture. Choose fewer doors. Choose fewer windows. Choose a life with less for anyone else to grab hold of. Can't garnish what does not exist. Can't repossess what was never financed. Can't leverage a man who owes nothing to anyone in the room. That is not poverty. That is power. That is the only kind of freedom the system cannot price, package, or take back from you. They stopped teaching you this not because it stopped working, because it worked on the wrong people.